An RPG is usually going to involve a lot of dialogue, so it's important to consider how your player is going to process all of the information. In this video, I wanted to go through a few of the design decisions I've made and talk about the requirements and constraints I've had to consider while implementing the current system. Hi, I'm BGK of Pear Tree Games, and this is Return of the Lividaea Devlog 3, Dialogue. My dialogue system has a few requirements guided by the game design. 1. Conversations happen between 4 or more characters at a time. Being a game about 4 central team members means they all should have a part of most conversations, sharing thoughts and ideas with each other, chiming in at various points in the conversation, or guiding the conversation if they want to change the topic or delve deeper into it. 2. Choices have consequences. When making choices, the player should be able to review the conversation if desired so they are confident in their decision. 3. Text only, no voiceover. Voiceover is complex and costly for a solo hobbyist developer, so we won't be doing any of that. Before I dive into the user interface, I wanted to briefly talk about writing dialogue. As is common for RPGs, Lividaea will have a branching narrative, meaning the player will be given choices to select at certain points in the conversation which will affect the game world. A seemingly intuitive approach to writing branching dialogue is to use a visual graph, since you can easily see, at a glance, all the various paths and where they lead and reconnect, or if any dead ends exist, where maybe they shouldn't. But personally, after trying out a few graph tools, I found this experience very slow. Having to create and position nodes, select from drop-downs, link nodes together can take up a fair bit of time when having to write thousands of lines. For this reason, I prefer using Inkle Studio's Ink language. It's simple text files with a powerful parser to branch and weave and gather any flows you need. It also allows you to step away from your game engine and just focus on writing when needed, but still play through the dialogue. That's not to say it doesn't have its own issues and that you should only use ink, but the takeaway is to consider how you're going to write and your development workflows when evaluating dialogue systems, and not just consider the engine integration. Okay, with that out of the way, let's move on. The most common dialogue box is the Dragon Quest JRPG or visual novel style, centered at the bottom of the screen. And for good reason. The static position makes it so the player always knows where to look during conversation sequences. It usually doesn't hide any important details on the screen. It provides a large area for long sentences or even choices along with the text. And portraits and or speaker names are easy to add. And finally, it's just familiar. The issue with this positioning for Lividaea is that it really excels at two-person dialogue. Either the conversant is in the center of the screen with first-person games like Obsidian's Fallout games, or the player and conversant are on either side of the screen, like Wintermoor Tactics Club. When there are multiple characters speaking, I find it a bit off. It just feels more one-on-one. A lot of games get around this by having cutscenes when larger groups of characters are talking, which works great, but not something I'm really going to be able to do. Another issue with this format is the history is hard to view. Fire Emblem Three Houses allowed you to pop up and review the conversation, but had it hidden otherwise. Disco Elysium solved these issues by placing the dialogue box on the side of the screen. This works very well for multiple speakers since you just add a portrait or speaker tag and the full history is always available to scroll. GameSpot has a great video with lead designer Robert Kurvitz breaking down the dialogue box design, which I highly recommend. Link in the description. But without voiceover and portraits, I think it's difficult to get the same effect. It becomes less like a story being played out and more like an article being typed out. Also, character animations would be kind of lost since they're at the center of the screen, while the player is reading the text on the side. So another common dialogue box is the speech bubble. Final Fantasy IX and Knight of the Woods do these very well. They account for many speakers, allows the player to focus on the text and any character animations at the same time, but they don't allow you to review the conversation. But there's no reason why the bubbles need to disappear. They could just move up, like in Disco Elysium, and the player can scroll back to them in place whenever they want. So that's what I've decided. I think it also gives it an almost graphic novel type feel to it. The only thing is with the rotating camera, we'll just want to keep the bubbles above each character so it's easier to associate the text with the speaker. For the camera, I've decided to zoom in a bit more than the standard game field of view. It helps focus the speaker and allows for a bit better clarity of the animations. I do feel sometimes the speaker can be hidden behind other characters, so did experiment with cutting the camera shots to different angles like the combat abilities will be using, but it was jarring to say the least. Now that we've placed our dialog boxes, we need to consider styling. For font, I've kept a single font face throughout the game. It's a simple retro pixel font, which I think reads well. Sizing is variable with script tags, but I hope the default is currently large enough for smaller screens. I'll probably make the default size adjustable in settings though. Contrast is white text on almost black background, so shouldn't have any issues there, but I always liked Final Fantasy's color customization on the menus, so I may implement that as well in the future. Typing speed is also variable with script tags, but the default should be slightly faster than normal reading speed, with the option to skip the typing animation entirely. I've opted for a scale transition animation at about 0.2 seconds. This will be one of the most viewed animations, so it's best to keep it as quick as possible, but still not instantaneous. The indicator to signify there is more dialogue I've used is just an underscore, but really it can be any image, just so it has some animation to draw attention to it. When offering choices to the player, you'll need to decide on a voice not only for your character, but for the player and how those two interact. You can have the silent character like Link in the Zelda franchise, with dialogue inferred with choices offered but never spoken, or you can have choices evoking the tone or the decision of a command, given like agree or disagree, with the character using their own voice in the dialogue. Or you can provide the full dialogue of what the character will say if that option is chosen. Personally, I like the second option, using just a part of the dialogue as the choice to give the tone of the decision but not the entire thing. For one, the entire dialogue response may be fairly long to give for each choice, but more importantly, I like to think of the character as being their own person, with the player simply nudging them in various directions, but are not in complete control. So that's where I am with the current design. I don't think it's perfect yet, but it's getting to where I think it feels comfortable to read, process, review, and interact with. Let me know in the comments if you have a favorite dialogue system, or how you're implementing dialogue in your own game. Thanks for watching. Cheers.